the past month, I've been wearing two smart rings, the well-known Oura ring and one of its biggest competitors, the Ultrahuman Air, to find out which one is the best. In this video, I'll break down price, design, comfort, sleep, and activity tracking, and most importantly, accuracy. And based on my experience, there's a very clear winner of these two. But before we dive in, quick disclaimer that Ultrahuman did send me this ring to test, but they didn't pay me, and they're not going to review this video before it goes live. Honestly, if they were, they probably would not like what I'm about to say. Spoiler alert. And no, this video is not sponsored by Oura either. I actually bought this ring myself to do a fair side-by-side comparison because I figured if I'm going to test one ring, I might as well test two. So if you're not familiar with these smart rings, they are essentially health and wellness trackers that monitor sleep, activity, heart rate, body temperature, and other biometric data. For those of you with ovaries, both rings can even do menstrual or fertility tracking. But since I am 9 months postpartum and my cycle is not regular at the moment, that is something I did not test. The Oura ring is the original of the two, first coming out in 2015, and now it's on the 4th generation, and this one came out in October 2024. Meanwhile, the Ultrahuman Air first debuted in 2023, and this I believe is the 2nd generation. Both rings are waterproof and reasonably durable, and they have pretty long battery life of 4 to 6 days for the Ultrahuman and about 8 days for the Oura. The rings charge via these included charging docks that connect via USB-C. Now you might be wondering, why wear one of these rings when a smartwatch can do a lot of the same functions like sleep and activity tracking? And that's a fair question. So that is why, in addition to wearing two smart rings, I also wore two smart watches to compare the experience as well as the data tracking accuracy. And I'll speak more about all of this later in the comfort and accuracy sections of the video. But off the bat, these smart rings are a lot smaller and more discreet than wearing a bulky watch. So that could be one of several reasons that you choose to wear a smart ring over a smart watch. All right, let's start with a price comparison. The latest version of the Ultrahuman Air and the Oura ring have a base price of $359 US. However, the Oura ring can cost $399 or even $499 if you want an upgraded finish like brushed silver, stealth, gold, or rose gold. And I admit the price is the reason why I ended up with the silver versus the gold because I just did not want to pay $500 for a smart ring. Meanwhile, Ultrahuman currently has 5 finish options, and they're all priced the same at $359. However, Oura ring has a mandatory subscription fee of $599 per month or $70 annually, while Ultrahuman has no subscription fee. So, Ultrahuman looks like the better deal on paper, but price isn't everything. Let's also talk about design and comfort. When I was reading older reviews of the Oura ring, a lot of folks said that previous generations were designed a little differently, and it wasn't very comfortable. I have to say that this 4th generation Oura ring seems to fix a lot of those problems, and its design feels like it's a lot closer to the Ultrahuman. Both rings are perfectly round, and the insides, where the sensors are smooth. They both feel really nice on my fingers, but I will say that the Ultrahuman does feel lighter and thinner, and the specs agree. The Oura ring weighs between 3.3 and 5.2 grams, while the Ultrahuman Air is 2.4 to 3.6 grams. And the weight varies because it really depends on the ring size. By the way, before you purchase either ring, it's important to first get the respective brand sizing kit. Because these rings don't fit quite like normal rings, I found I actually needed to size up for both brands. One more note on the design. I don't know if you can tell, but this is really subtle. But I feel like the Oura ring is a little bit rounded on the edges versus the Ultrahuman, which is a little bit sharper on the edge. I mean, it's subtle, but if you see them side by side and you really care about the design, I actually like the smoother edge of the Oura a little bit more. As for which finger to wear it on, both brands recommend wearing it on the index finger. And I tried doing that for about a day with the Ultrahuman, and I found that it really got in my way. I didn't realize how much my index finger really comes into contact with things that I touch. And so I really got worried about scratching it. And so I'm doing this for demonstration purposes, but how I actually wore these on a daily basis was the Oura ring, it's on my ring finger here, and the Ultrahuman, I ended up putting on my middle finger here. And so this way I did feel like it was a little bit more sheltered and was less likely to get scratched or just come into contact with objects to potentially scratch the exterior. But in terms of comfort, I think it took me about a week to adjust to wearing the rings, especially the Oura, because it is a little bit thicker. So when I do wear rings, they tend to be thin. So I really felt how thick these rings were on my fingers and how my other fingers kept rubbing against them. I mean, my middle or my ring finger can't even touch the side fingers very well because of how thick that ring is. So that did take a little bit of getting used to, but I admit that these rings were more comfortable to wear than smartwatches, at least when doing certain activities like sleeping. I mean, I really honestly hated sleeping with this Apple Watch, and I'm so excited that this experiment is over and I don't have to wear this watch to bed anymore. So if you are interested in tracking your sleep and you don't want to wear a watch to bed, a smart ring like this could actually be the answer. Now, since I mentioned sleep tracking, let's take a look at the data that both rings show you. Both apps are definitely different in their designs. I'll speak more about this later on in the video, but essentially they offer you similar data, but they have their own ways of interpreting it for you. For this particular date, both rings show the same amount of total sleep and time in bed, and I appreciate that they differentiate between the two because during this time, I was watching a lot of Netflix in bed, so that's why there's a 2-hour lapse between when I got in bed and when I actually fell asleep. But both times are pretty much identical. The overall sleep scores are also similar. It's 89 or optimal for the Oura. But for the Ultrahuman, it just gives me a sleep score of 82, and I'm honestly not sure what 82 means. Is that a good score or a bad score? I don't know. I wish it would give me some context. But when we take a look at sleep contributors, there are some metrics that they agree on and others that they don't. So Oura says my efficiency was 86% or good, while Ultrahuman, it alerts me that it needs attention. And that's because it's tracking my average over the last 7 days, which is really interesting. So that is why Ultrahuman sleep contributors look a little alarming, or it's flagging those scores for me. They're basing them on a 7-day average, while Oura appears to score each night independently. Well, let's move on to the sleep stages. Even though both apps have the same total duration of time asleep, their classifications of the type of sleep that I was getting are quite contrasting. So Oura says I got 2 hours and 33 minutes of REM sleep and 2 hours of deep sleep, while Ultrahuman says I got 5 hours and 43 minutes of REM and 1 hour and 20 minutes of deep sleep. Those numbers are pretty different. So let's go ahead and pull in some smartwatch data to see what they say. The Apple Watch has a pretty similar time asleep and time in bed metric, and its stages say that my REM sleep was 2 hours and 32 minutes, and deep sleep was 2 hours. While Garmin says my REM sleep was 3 hours and 20 minutes, and deep sleep was about 2 hours. By the way, the Garmin watch that I'm wearing is the Venu 2S, and this is one of the latest Apple Watches. I'll leave it in the description below if you want to check the watches out. But for accuracy's sake, let's take a look at another date to double check. So on March 9th, Ultrahuman says I got 2 hours and 25 minutes of REM and about 1 hour and 2 minutes of deep sleep, while Oura says I got 1 hour and 15 minutes of REM and about 1 hour 14 minutes of deep sleep. Apple says I got 1 hour and 18 minutes of REM and 1 hour and 13 minutes of deep sleep, while Garmin says I got 38 minutes of REM and 1 hour 18 minutes of deep sleep. So basically, Oura and Apple are trending pretty identical in terms of their sleep tracking. But let's go ahead and take a look at their activity tracking data and see how accurate that was. On March 8th, Ultrahuman says I burned 2,901 kcals and took 13,976 steps, while Oura says I burned about 2,300 calories and took 14,482 steps, or the equivalent of 9.5 miles. Meanwhile, Apple just says 18,640 steps. I don't see calorie or mile data here. And Garmin says I burned 1,955 calories and took 16,221 steps, or about 7.7 miles. Okay, let's take a look at one other date just to have more data. On March 9th, Ultrahuman says I burned 711 calories and took 250 steps. Oura says I burned 2,365 calories and took 21,731 steps, or about 10.2 miles. Apple just says 16,720 steps. And Garmin says 2,180 calories and 23,082 steps, or about 11.3 miles. Wow. Okay, if sleep tracking data was hit or miss, activity tracking data is even more so. Now, I have long suspected this about my fitness trackers because I've used a lot of them over the years. The data they show you seems to be vastly different based on the brand, and this definitely paints that picture. I will say that I prefer the trackers that convert my steps into mileage because that's a more meaningful or universally understood metric, because really, what is a step? Nobody really knows. But even then, the mileage comparisons are about a mile or two off at times. But I will say that I've always favored Garmin for activity tracking because it uses GPS data, and it even shows me a map of where I did my activity. So even though it often reports the highest values, I tend to think that it trends to be accurate. And for Garmin, I also like how it gives you even more data about your activity, such as your pace, and just all kinds of metrics that you don't get with other trackers. Even the Apple Watch. To me, the Apple Watch actually gives you the least amount of data when it comes to tracking your activities. And so, yeah, that's why I've always preferred Garmin for activity tracking. But if we look at the tracking rings, the Oura seems to be a little more accurate, ? As you can see, the Ultrahuman had a blip on March 9th, which I'll discuss very soon. But I think the main takeaway for tracker accuracy is that the exact mileage or step number really shouldn't matter. What should matter is the range, or just knowing that you were slightly more active on one day or slept better on one day than another. Because as we're seeing, none of these trackers are 100% accurate, or at least it's hard to say which one is. But before I move on, there are a couple more things I want to say about using a smart ring versus a smart watch for activity tracking. One obvious downside to both rings is that they don't have any buttons or interfaces. This makes it hard for activity tracking because even though both rings will automatically detect and classify your activities, sometimes you want the reassurance that the tracker is indeed tracking your workout. And this is something you can easily verify with a smartwatch, with its interface and its buttons. And it can also give you live statistics like your current pacing and your distance during your workout. But it's something you can't do with these rings, unless you connect them to your smartphone. But I don't know about you, one of the biggest reasons why I got into wearing smart trackers in the first place was to avoid carrying my phone with me all around, especially during my workouts. So if fitness tracking is your top priority, I would definitely recommend a smart watch over a smart ring. And as I mentioned earlier, I would recommend the Garmin over the Apple Watch because I feel like it gives you a lot more in-depth statistics when it comes to your activities. But on the plus side, both smart rings will track your data even when your phone is not nearby, or when the ring is on airplane mode. And I actually had my rings on airplane mode most of the time. I currently do right now, when I was wearing them in order to save battery life, but also because I try to limit my EMF exposure as much as possible. So I appreciate that both rings offer airplane mode in the settings. But to answer the question, should you have a smart ring or a smart watch? I think there's a really good argument to have both. The watch is better for activity tracking, and the ring is more comfortable and arguably more accurate for sleep tracking. Anyway, like I mentioned earlier, both rings have their respective phone apps where you can see all of the data that they collect. So let's review each phone app. Overall, I prefer the aesthetic and the layout of information in the Oura Ring app. I really like how this top row shows me all of my key scores at a glance, like my readiness score, my sleep score, activity, heart rate, and sleep at a glance without having to scroll in the app. And if I want more details, I can tap on any of these scores to see all the factors that contributed to those scores. I also really like the simplicity of these bottom tabs here. They give me a snapshot of my vitals, like my resting heart rate, my sleep efficiency, and my stress levels. Finally, there's the My Health tab that tells me about my resilience, or my ability to withstand and recover from stress. These are all pretty valuable metrics, and I like being able to access them really quickly and intuitively. In contrast, the Ultrahuman app, it isn't bad, but I just found it was a little busy in comparison to the Oura app. I also prefer Oura's overall readiness score that summarizes everything nicely, whereas in the Ultrahuman app, you have to look at each score individually and come up with your own average. But one thing the Ultrahuman app gives you that the Oura Ring doesn't is a morning alertness score. I'm really not sure how it measures my alertness in the morning, but it's honestly something I've never really paid attention to until this app started calling my attention to it. Something else I love about the Ultrahuman app is their timeline. Oura also has a timeline where it shows your sleep and your wake times and each major activity throughout the day. But Ultrahumans takes it up a notch by also including useful tips. Like here, it advises me on when my caffeine window opens and when it closes, so I know when I should and shouldn't consume caffeine throughout the day, which is super helpful. Because I've always had a suspicion, but it's nice to have confirmation of when my caffeine window is. It also tells me when to start avoiding bright lights and intense activity to start winding down for bed. But for all of the good in the Ultrahuman app, I find most of these bottom tabs here to be pretty useless. This metabolism tab is a pure sales page that I wish I could opt out of because I keep accidentally tapping on it. The zones tab is meant to be for sharing scores with friends, but I honestly don't know anyone else who wears an Ultrahuman ring, so this has stayed pretty blank for me. But the Discover tab is actually more useful, as it's full of educational articles, podcasts, and quite a few video workouts. These are actually really high quality, and it's really nice that they're free and included with the app. So now I'm nearing the conclusion where I'm going to share which of these two smart rings is best. And here's where I need to address the problems that I had with the Ultrahuman Air. There are a lot of good features about this ring, as I've mentioned throughout this video, and there are some people that really love this ring. But I had some pretty big problems with it. There have been too many to name specifically, but essentially, the Ultrahuman had multiple periods where it just suddenly stopped tracking me. Or sometimes it would track my activities, but not my sleep, and vice versa. This was so frustrating and random. For a few days it would be fine, and all of a sudden it would just go offline. And that's why my activity data on March 9th looks way off compared to the other trackers. Now, to their credit, the Ultrahuman support team is very responsive, and they tried in earnest to help me. They sent me multiple firmware updates to my ring, but I did think that was an odd approach to solving my problem, because usually firmware updates are rolled out to all users of a product, not issued individually, so that seemed a little strange. And each time they sent me a new firmware update, I feel like that broke something else. So this just kept happening. And even after doing a factory reset and various forms of troubleshooting with their support team, I started to feel like I was a beta tester. And so that's when I pretty much told them I'm not willing to keep troubleshooting their product. I probably could have asked them for a replacement because there's a good chance that mine is faulty. But I did a quick Google search, and it showed me that my problems are not isolated. And there are quite a few other people who have been through 3 or 4 different Ultrahuman Air rings and are still facing problems. I have no idea how those people have so much patience, because I definitely didn't have any for this ring, especially when I was wearing another ring tracker, which was flawless in comparison. This Oura ring never had a single issue. And so that is why in 2025, I cannot currently recommend the Ultrahuman Air based on my experience. With that said, I really hope that they are able to release a more stable and reliable version in the future, because it's good to have a subscription-free version to Oura. But at the moment, Oura is the tried and true product that I would pick for my sleep tracking and biometric tracking needs. You guys let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you've tried either of these rings, if you too have had some problems with the Ultrahuman, Or if you've had problems with Oura, I'd like to hear about that as well. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video with far less trackers on my hands and wrists.